it's time to continue. The topic will be interventions in education, and the speaker will be Stine Nyhus Larsen from Aarhus University. Please.
I'm Stine, and I will be presenting the work title Childhood and Adolescent Interventions in a Danish Setting, which is a meta-analysis of evidence from Trygfonden's Center for Child Research. And this paper is joint work with Michael Rosholm, Katrine Tøllenbøl, and Nikolaj Poulsen. So the introduction to this work is that we all come from the Center for Child Research, which is funded by Trygfonden, a Danish insurance company. The center has more than 10 years of experience in interventions in educational context. And these interventions include a range of different areas, such as general language development for children, language development for bilingual children, language development for dyslexic children. It includes effects on teachers' aides in Danish classroom. It includes special camps targeted disadvantaged boys. It includes interventions specifically target developing math skills. It includes the development of language tests now used widely in the Danish education system. And all these different interventions are evaluated using proper methods. The gold standard is, of course, to use randomized control trials to evaluate these interventions, but in many contexts this is unfeasible, either due to the nature of the intervention, due to the implementation context, or other considerations. And in these cases we use quasi-experimental methods instead. And as has already been mentioned in this room, this is feasible due to the very good registers we have in the Nordic countries and also in Denmark. So the aim of this work is to synthesize all these intervention studies from Trygfonden Center for Child Research in a meta-analysis. We want to look into specifics about the interventions that influence the estimated effect sizes, such as the evaluation method. Does it matter whether the intervention was evaluated with an RCT or another method? Are there other mediators or moderators that has an influence on the estimated effect size? And this work extends previous work done by Rosholm et al. From 2021. They also did a meta-analysis of interventions from the center. They focused only on RCTs, and they found evidence of what we call a Heckman curve, meaning that early interventions in childhood development tend to have larger effect sizes, both because children are have a lot to learn when they are young, but also because early investments might mean that future investments are more effective. This work builds on existing literature, and much of the existing work on childhood development and the like has been done in the United States. Here we see programs such as Head Start and pre-kindergarten, which are center-based programs, and they fall in two main lines of research: research on children's learning opportunities and research on different instructional practices. That research has found that quality interactions, enriched learning environments, teacher developments, and specifically targeted curricula are effective in improving different learning outcomes for children. Also, school factors have been heavily studied, but this area of research is less abundant in terms of research with strong causal identification. However, they have identified different structural factors that are important, and they have looked into different ways of improving early reading instruction. We see limited research on parent and family programs, with the main exception being the Abecedarian project, which is a large-scale project that has been found to have positive effects long-term on different child development outcomes. So the methods applied in this work is, as I said, based on data from one research center. The reason for this is that we have unique access to high detailed information on the interventions included in the analysis. We have access to information about cost-standardized effect sizes, so we can calculate how effective are these interventions when we scale them by how expensive they are. We are able to survey the principal investigators and get information on the intervention development, the intervention context, the intervention ingredients. And this, of course, has some drawbacks, introduces risks of bias because we evaluate ourselves this way, and we try to mitigate this by conducting risk of bias analyses of all included studies. We also know that this means that the insights are limited, and they are sort of limited to this research center, and the generalizability outside the center is limited, but we argue that many of these findings would generalize to other Scandinavian contexts. So we sort of balance the trade-off between this high detail information and the drawbacks this way. The inclusion criteria for the studies included in the analyses is that they have to be conducted by a researcher affiliated with Trygfonden Center for Child Research, and the intervention has to take place in Denmark. The study has to be completed, and effect sizes on some cognitive or educational outcome has to be available in a publicly available report or scientific journal article. And lastly, for the analysis of cost-standardized effect sizes, we of course have to be able to calculate the cost-standardized effect sizes, so we have to be able to gain access on cost of intervention. This could either be directly from the paper or article, but it could also be through obtaining information about the cost from the principal investigator. The outcomes included in the meta-analyses has to be some sort of standardized test score or educational outcome indicator. In many cases, we use the national tests as outcome because these are available in the high-quality registers. National tests in Denmark are taken at specific grades throughout the education system in language, math, and all other public school subjects. In cases where children are too young to enter the public school, so in preschool interventions, we use typically language assessments instead, because we have no such register test available. So we use these language assessments that are used as part of the school preparation program in many kindergartens in Denmark. For young adults who have completed the public school system, we typically use level of education as outcome, because these interventions are mainly focused at young people who have yet to acquire a formal education. So the interventions are targeted at helping these youngsters to achieve this level of education. We use the primary effect on outcome when this is available, but in some cases the papers only report effects on some subtest, and in those cases we average the effect sizes across the subtests and aggregate the standard deviations using appropriate formulas. And we then standardize the effect sizes with the group standard deviation. We do this because we want to take into account that some of these interventions might target the treatment variation, not only the treatment mean. So by standardizing with the group, control group standard deviation, we assume that this is the standard variation in the group. And lastly, when we look at the cost standardized effect sizes, we take the average cost per participant and convert this into $100 so that we get the effect size per $100, which allows for easy comparison between studies. We also conduct an analysis of different mediators and moderators that might play a role in effect size. So we want to see what drives the effects, the variations in the estimated effect sizes that we see across the studies. One of the reasons we can do this is because we have been able to survey all principal investigators on specifics of the intervention. So we look at different moderators, which is things that are around the intervention, so the implementation context, such as intervention design, evaluation design, what was the target group, what was the age of the target group, what was the learning outcome used to evaluate the intervention. We also look at specific mediators, who was the intervention designer, was practitioners involved when designing the intervention, was it aimed directly at the cognitive outcome, or was it working through mediators such as socio-emotional skills? Is the intervention aimed at improving quantity or quality? What is the active ingredient of the intervention? To what degree was the intervention manualized? So how much freedom did implementers have in implementing the intervention? Was it targeted at specifically disadvantaged groups such as low SES homes or immigrant homes? Where did it take place? Was it at home or in some sort of institution, daycare? How much support was given during the intervention? All these information go into the mediator and moderator analysis. Okay, so the model we use to evaluate take into account that there is high degrees of interdependencies and the heterogeneities that come into play. So we know that heterogeneity may stem from the specific learning outcome used. Was the intervention focused at improving language or math development? There are different target subgroups along the age span. So was it aimed at young children, older children? We know that content and implementation vary a lot between studies. So all these studies have in common that they take place in the same research center following the same rigorous procedures in intervention development. We know that they are developed with high quality in mind, with many different people who participate in the development, but the specifics of the intervention vary a lot. We also take into account that there are some dependencies between different learning outcomes, treatment arms, and studies. So we see that within each study there may be dependencies between different treatment arms, and within treatment arms there may be dependencies between different learning outcomes, and within each learning outcome there may be dependencies between participants. And all this is taken into account by the formal model we use, which estimates the population effect size by the true population effect size plus a random component for these different hierarchical levels. So while we argue that this specification takes into account the heterogeneity in the model, we formally test this using Cochrane's Q and the I-squared statistic. We also conduct cluster robust estimates of the variance-covariance matrix and hence the standard errors to make sure that these clusters and interdependencies are accounted for in the estimations. We use the sandwich estimation tool for this. When we conduct the meta-regressions, which is the analysis of the different mediators and moderators, we use practically the same specification, except we include a term for all these variables indicating the different mediators and moderators. The procedure is a little more complex because we have to first deal with the fact that some of these mediators and moderators are exact linear combinations. This is a problem both for interpretability but also for model convergence. So we first identify the variables that are exact linear combinations, meaning they vary identically across the different studies. And then we remove one of these linear combinations so that we only have one of each a variation combination. Then we perform a forward selection procedure, meaning we add one of the variables at a time and see which has the most explanatory power. Then this one is added, and we afterwards add the remaining variables one at a time to see which has the most explanatory power until we have all variables added in the model. Along the way, we keep track of the Akagi information criterion because we have to balance the inclusion of an additional variable. It has to mean that the explanatory power of the model is significantly improved. And the Akagi information criterion balances the trade-off between explanatory power and adding too many variables. So with this procedure, we get the most explanatory power for the fewest variables. Lastly, we perform sensitivity analyses and robustness analyses, and the sensitivity analyses include a leave one out analysis, because we want to look into whether one or few studies are driving the effects that we find. So we exclude one of the studies at a time, and then we repeat the entire analysis, both the simple meta-analysis and the meta-regressions, to see if results change drastically, which they hopefully shouldn't. Okay, so I will now move into presenting the results of the study. The first table here presents the analysis of the raw effect sizes, the simple meta-analysis. And we see that the estimated true population effect size is 0.104, and this result is significant. So this means that across the 63 effect sizes, 49 treatment arms, and 32 studies included, generally interventions have a positive effect on some child development outcome. And the I-squared statistic, which is a measure of heterogeneity, is 95%, and this is a relatively high I-squared statistic, because it means that 95% of the variation we see is estimated to be due to true heterogeneity between the studies. So while we would like that the studies were very similar in nature, we also know, as I said previously, that they are not. We know that they have very different means of working. We know that they are developed very differently. So it does make sense that there is a lot of heterogeneity that is not just due to sampling noise. The next slide here shows the forest plot, as we call it, of the included effect sizes. They are ranked by their estimate, and we see that they range from 0.25, which is the least effectful intervention, to the most effectful intervention called Play and Learn, which has an effect size of 0.68. This intervention is targeted language development and takes place in kindergarten, and it works through specific play games to improve language development. The next most effectful intervention is one called TMTM, a specific treatment arm within this, which is a mathematics intervention where a teacher focuses on one student, and it takes place in grade 2. So we see that the most effective interventions are very different in nature. This figure visualizes the effect sizes as a function of cost per participant. And as we see in this figure, there is no clear relationship between effect size and cost of intervention. So it is not the case that more expensive interventions typically have higher effect sizes. This is also the case when we split by whether the intervention was significant or not, or the effect size was significant or not. And it is also the case if we split by whether the intervention was evaluated using an RCT or not. So there is just generally no strong association between cost and effect size. And this is interesting because it motivates, first of all, the analysis of the cost standardized effect sizes. So if we penalize interventions by how costly they are, does that change ranking in the forest plot? And it also motivates the analysis of the mediators and moderators, because we want to look into, okay, it's not price of intervention that is driving the effects. Do we know what it is? Then can we identify other variables that are important in identifying effective interventions? It's important to note that when we now cost standardized effect sizes, they lose some of their numerical interpretability, because we cost standardize them to effect size per $100, but we could also have standardized to effect size per $1,000 or $10. So the numerical result will be dependent on how we change or how we choose to standardize the effect sizes, and it is a constructed measure that is not directly interpretable as a usual effect size. But it does enable comparison of the relative efficiency of the interventions. So that is the result we see here. It's the simple meta-analysis of the cost standardized effect sizes. Again, we see a generally positive, though smaller in magnitude, estimated effect size, and this result is also statistically significant. So that means that even when we take into account that interventions vary a lot in cost, effect sizes are still generally positive. Interventions still has a overall positive effect on some child development outcome. The I-squared statistics, so the estimate of remaining heterogeneity, has increased to almost 100%, meaning that almost all of the variation we see now is caused by true variation between the studies. And this figure shows the forest plot for the cost standardized effect sizes. So the picture is the same, 80% are positive and 53% are significant, but the most effective intervention is now an intervention called performance information and feedback, which had low effect sizes, but they were also very, very cheap. So you get a lot of effect size per dollar spent in these interventions. And they're both mathematics interventions, while the third most effectful intervention is the Leap Open, taking place in kindergarten, which is also a language intervention. So still, the most effectful interventions vary a lot in nature, even when we take cost into account. I will now move on to presenting the results of the meta-regressions, so the mediator and moderator analyses. And what is important to note here is that there are both variables that are associated with higher effect sizes and variables that are associated with lower effect sizes. So generally, we see that interventions targeted educators, meaning that they work at improving child development by enabling the educators to conduct better or more quality interactions with the children. That's generally associated with higher effect sizes. So is interventions targeted preschool, so younger children. We also see that interventions where the learning outcome is other, which is typically a vocabulary test, is more associated with higher effect sizes than learning outcomes targeted language and math, the national tests typically. And we see that using process quality as the active ingredient is more effective than using structural quality or learning formats. And process quality is sort of what happens inside the classroom. It's classroom management, it's the learning materials, it's how the teacher interacts with the children. On the other hand, we see that fully manualized interventions are less effective. So that's interventions where the implementer has a high degree of freedom in implementing the intervention. We see that interventions targeting learning, language as the learning outcome are less effective. We see that age is negatively associated with effect size, and that makes good sense since interventions targeted preschool were more effective. And lastly, we see that generally increasing quality is less effective than increasing quantity. So more time tend to be more effective than better time. And then there is one variable that is conspicuous by its absence, which is evaluation method. It does not seem to matter whether the intervention was evaluated using an RCT or a quasi-experimental design. So this means that, on average, the studies included that use quasi-experimental evaluation methods were unbiased on average. We cannot rule out that there may be bias in individual studies, but it is not the case that quasi-experimental studies are generally associated with either higher or lower effect sizes. A hypothesis might have been that RCTs would be better at isolating the effect sizes because we assume that the only variation left is caused by the intervention when we randomize, but we find no indication that this is the case based on this result. And if we look at the meta-regression for the cost standardized effect sizes, the picture is the same. It is more or less the same variables that are selected as important for effect size. Again, evaluation method is conspicuous by its absence. So regardless of whether we penalize interventions for how costly they are, it does not seem to matter how they are evaluated. And we gain sort of more trust in studies evaluated using quasi-experimental methods based on this result, because it we see no indication that they are, as I said before, biased on average. Okay, so now I will move on to some of the robustness analyses that we have conducted to make sure that our results are reliable. The first thing we did was conduct a test for publication bias formally. We used the Kendall rank correlation test for this, and for the raw effect sizes, the test is insignificant, meaning that we cannot reject the null hypothesis that there is no publication bias. This is also what we see in the funnel plot here, the figure on the left, where there is high precision closer to the true effect size, and the shape of the dots is relatively symmetric. The picture is not the same when we look at the cost-standardized effect sizes. Here the formal test is significant, and we do see some asymmetry in the funnel plot. We see right-hand clustering. However, we argue that, as I said before, the cost-standardized effect sizes is a constructed measure. And if we saw publication bias due to cost of intervention, this would mean that either more or less expensive interventions were more likely to be published. And we consider this to be very little, to have a very low likelihood, because in many cases, articles do not even report effect sizes. We had to obtain them through surveying the principal investigators. So that this should have introduced some sort of bias in the results, we deem very little likely. And they make us, so this analysis make us no less worried about publication bias. Still, we conduct a formal risk of bias assessment for each included study. We do this for each treatment arm and for each learning outcome within each treatment arm. We use the tools from something called Cochrane methods to assess the risk of bias objectively, and they provide sort of a checklist that you have to manually go through for all learning outcomes within treatment arms to assess risk of bias from different sources. And this figure shows the results for the RCT studies, because you use a different tool for different designs. And as you can see, overall bias across the RCTs has been deemed to be a low risk of bias. The picture is the same when looking at the quasi-experimental studies. We also judge all included effect sizes to have a low risk of bias. In some cases, the algorithm implemented within the tool considered the studies to have some concern for risk of bias, and in those cases it was almost always due to the fact that there was no publicly available pre-registered analysis plan for the studies. However, we know, because we have this insight from the center, that already when securing funding from TrygFonden, we have to specify analysis plans. We have to internally pre-register analysis plans. And while they are not publicly available, we have been able to sort of assess whether they have been followed. We can survey the principal investigators on whether they internally followed some analysis plan. We know that TrygFonden encourages publication regardless of effect sizes. And we also saw that almost half of the included studies were actually insignificant. So that made us confident in judging all these studies to have a low risk of bias, even though the algorithm from the tool was less certain. I will now present the analysis of the sensitivity analysis with the leave one out analysis. So what we did here was look for influential studies, and this figure shows the estimated population effect size of the simple meta-analyses when leaving one study out at a time. So first we left out the study called Boys Camp, and then conducted the simple meta-analysis again. And as you can see, the estimated effect size is stable around 0.1. So this indicates no presence of influential studies that are driving the effects. And if we look at the meta-regressions with the mediator-moderator analysis, the picture is the same. The same variables are chosen as important for effect size, and their estimate is always in the same direction. It's not there are no variables that sometimes are positive and sometimes are negative. Sometimes more variables are included than others, and in these cases, the estimates are smaller for the included variables, but that makes sense, right? That when more variables are included, less explanatory power is attributed to each of the included variables. So across these two leave one out analyses, we find no indication of presence of highly influential studies. And while I have not included them here, we have conducted the same analysis for the cost-standardized effect sizes, and for those the picture is the same. Stable estimations, no indication of highly influential studies, which means that we have more trust in our findings. Okay, I will now move on to a discussion of the results. So let me remind you that both the meta-analysis, simple meta-analysis of the raw effect sizes and of the cost-standardized effect sizes, in both cases we found positive estimated population effect sizes, and both were significant. So generally, overall, we find that a thorough scientific approach to developing interventions in a child development context seems to work. It does not matter whether you conduct whether the intervention is aimed at mathematics or language, what the age group is. Across all different interventions, they seem to work. So carefully designed interventions, be rigorous in your procedure, then you will in many cases be able to develop very effective interventions. However, we have some variation, of course, across the different studies, interventions. So for example, we see that preschool interventions tend to be more effective. This is consistent with previous literature. As I mentioned, for example, the Rosholm 2021 paper has found that previous interventions or early interventions are more effective than later interventions. And it's found across the literature broadly. We also see that working through educators, so developing interventions that are aimed at helping educators conduct more quality, have more quality interactions with the children, that seems to be very effective. We also see that fully manualized interventions are less effective. So interventions where implementers have a high degree of freedom, they tend to be less effective. It's important to note, however, that only 12.7% of the studies were actually fully manualized. And we cannot rule out that these studies had something else in common than the fact that they were fully manualized, and that this effect is instead, or that this other variable is instead driving the effect. And that is true for all of the mediators and moderators that have low variation. So what does it actually reflect? It's also important to note that study design was an insignificant predictor. Both randomized control trials and quasi-experimental methods are useful. They are unbiased on average. But it's important to note, of course, that assumptions for these different methods and hence the generalization differs. So we know that for randomized control trials, the generalizability is broad. We can assume it's okay to assume that effects would be similar when conducted on in a different context, but that is not necessarily the case for quasi-experimental studies because they have higher or more strict assumptions and less generalizability. We also have similar findings both when looking at raw effect sizes and cost-standardized effect sizes. So it does not seem to matter how expensive the intervention is, which might also be a bit surprising. In a way, we might have hoped that more expensive interventions were more effective, right? So when you spend more money on an intervention, you also hope that to develop a more effective intervention, but we do not find evidence that this is the case. And lastly, I would like to discuss the limitations of the study. So first of all, we'll only look at short-term effects. But we know that fade-out happens in many cases. It's a well-known phenomenon. We know that the degree of fade-out will also vary. So if we took into account that some interventions may be very effective immediately after the intervention, but over time the effect would vanish and the control group would sort of catch up with the treatment group, that might change the picture of effectful interventions. But in many cases, only these short-term effects are available, so we will never sort of have the means of knowing how effective they are over time. When we look at the treatment costs, we have treated them as fixed, so we have assumed that scaling the interventions would scale linearly in terms of costs. So adding 10 times as many participants would mean that the cost would increase 10 times as well. But in practice, that would probably not be the case, right? In many cases, it would be scaling the intervention would be much cheaper than scaling the number of participants. And we have also estimated the costs in some cases, both based on how the principal investigators responded, and they have also sometimes estimated the cost of the intervention, so it's not necessarily the most precise estimate. So we have definitely introduced some risk of bias or some heterogeneity into the model when conducting the cost standardized effect sizes. We consider the internal validity of the study to be quite high, because we know that the studies have been implemented in a very similar context under very similar circumstances. We therefore have reason to believe that the interventions or the findings of this study would generalize to new studies done within the same context. We also argue that they would, to a high degree at least, generalize to interventions done in a similar context, so in a Scandinavian welfare system where the general quality of education is high. However, when we look at, if we imagine that the interventions would be applied in a different context in countries where less is spent on education, we might actually assume that some of the interventions might have even higher effects because there's more room for improvement in childhood development. So high external validity to Scandinavian context and low external validity to contexts outside Scandinavia. We would also like to acknowledge that we have been focusing on one research center, and this of course limits the external validity. We have excluded some valuable insights from very good research done by very competent researchers, and this is of course a limitation of this study. The reason we did this, as I already mentioned, is that it allowed us to make this very detailed analysis of costs and effects. It allowed us to survey the principal investigators on all these active ingredients, and thus we were able to conduct this mediator-moderator analysis to sort of look into what is associated with higher and lower effect sizes. Do we know what characterizes effectful interventions and what characterizes less effectful interventions? But of course the perspective might be skewed. All regions are not represented in this study. And yeah, we are well aware of that, but it was sort of a trade-off between the level of detail that we wanted and the external validity that we would be able to generalize across. Yeah, so that was it.
Okay, thank you very much, Stina. And the next discussant will be Hannu Karhunen from Labore. So 15 minutes, the floor is yours.
Oops. Oh, yeah. Thank you. So, which way?
Green button.
Green. Oh.
Green one.
Yeah. No. Oh, so my name is Hannu Karhunen. I'm a research leader from Labore, and I'm really pleased to be here and give a comments for this paper. I'm gonna give only short comments on this paper, and I'm gonna talk more about this kind of like what happens in Nordic countries and especially what happens in Finland. So I'm gonna try to give up some kind of reflection, like what should we do. I was extremely pleased to read this because it gave me a chance to read the paper which is built upon, paper by Rosholm. And it's a really good survey in that sense that it really finds the Heckman curve. But then on the other hand, it includes really important discussion about what do we think about Heckman curve. So in traditional sense, the Heckman curve is this, that marginal returns for investments are higher in a younger age and then declines if we invest in older cohorts. But you could also think about that as this kind of efficient frontier. So if you think about public policy where we invest money, quite a lot of money in education, we get most of it when we invest in younger cohorts. So in this sense, if you think about education as educational investments as this kind of interventions, that frontier is as like this kind of set of best case scenarios, what we get out from this kind of educational policies. So it's some kind of maximum value what we can get from the money. And it's like a really interesting thing to think about that even in Nordic country where we use quite a lot of money on education, we still find positive coefficients, positive effect for this intervention. So it tells us that perhaps we are quite a far away from this frontier, which we should try to get on. And it's a really excellent paper in that sense to have this discussion. And now then Larsen et al. They expand this paper and they add their non-RCTs and they find the similar results basically. So Heckman curve is still alive there. And in my mind it's a really good job. And if I understood correctly, the editor of the journal is giving the technical comments, so I can focus on some other stuff. What I was thinking about is that okay, you're really focusing on these studies on this one institute, which I understand really well, so that you can get more insight from that. And it's really important to highlight that it's a really good way to process these things. But still, I would argue that it's a little bit hard to understand what the treatments really are, in that sense that because there are so many different kind of treatments, educational treatments, and I would like to see some kind of clarification about how, by topic what those are. And it was quite a hard to see that through from those papers. And in that sense, we have got a lot of other studies I know, not from Denmark, but also for example, from Norway, really good papers which also study these things. So I would somehow like to see some kind of comparison still that what is the external validity. And it would bring some joy, at least for me, to see those results and that kind of discussion. And as you said, at the moment you are dealing with quite a short-term outcomes, and I really hope that in the future these RCTs which have been done, they would be a new version of those where there would be a long-term measurement. So it's really nice that if you follow them as a panel in the future, next 20 years or something like that, it's cool. And I would like to also stress that replications are really important in that sense that you know all the details, how the studies were made. So please hire PhD students or someone else to repeat those studies, because usually there's some mistakes in the code or something's happening there, and usually we find out that some share of the studies don't match up to reality afterwards. So replications are really important. And now I'm going to jump to Norway. Sorry about that. I know you're from Denmark. So we know that there are a lot of good field experiments for education coming from Denmark, but also from Norway. So, for example, the paper which is there top there from Economic Journal, really good journal, they are studying what is the effect of one additional teacher in a class environment in the first and second grade, and how it affects the reading skills of the children. So it's a really wide, large field experiment. If I remember correctly, there's something like 6,000 students, 300 schools. So really large experiment. Another question really is how do Danish and Norwegians manage to do this? And if you read those papers through, you really find out these similarities, that why it's possible. So you really find out that first of all, the administration, the public officials are really interested about this. They help researchers. The collaboration between the administration side and research side, it really works. So the second thing is that there's really this kind of really strong research infrastructure which helps researchers to carry out the field experiment. And here is an example, and if we move on a little bit like how countries differ in this kind of research infra. If you think about national assessments for students, we know that in Sweden, for example, students are measured in 3rd, 6th, and 9th grade. In Denmark, you said that you are assessing students all the time. I don't know why you don't assess them in the 5th grade, but you assess them in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and then in 9th grade you have a final exam, which I guess is like an exit exam. It's the exam which you're using when you apply to the secondary education. So it's this kind of, and we know, okay, and also we like in Norway, Iceland, and Estonia, we have quite a lot of different measurements at the national level. So what country is missing from there? Finland. But I'm not going to talk about that yet. But I'm going to trying to tell you how they use this information, because I think that's quite an interesting thing. Teachers, in my understanding, in these countries, they use this information as a mental checkout, like what works, if I'm doing something, how things are going on. So it's a tool for them to improve teaching, in my understanding. It's also this kind of it gives performance informants also for the children and for the parents, so that children and parents know how good or bad they are. That's one function. And the third function is this kind of administrative accountability function, which is that they are bad schools, they are bad teachers, they are really good schools, really good teachers, but we need to know that we can help those institutions. So this kind of accountability comes out from this kind of measurements by design. So now that we move out to Finland, we have a really, really decentralized system of education, and actually we do not have any accountability in this framework. Municipalities are by law conducting self-evaluations, and we know from the surveys that self-evaluations means different things for different municipalities. And some municipalities do not perform self-evaluation. So as I told you earlier on, we do not have national standardized tests, so we do not have an output measure for different interventions, but we do not have an input side either. So we do not know what happens in schools. We do not carry out what the resources are. We do not carry out who are the teachers, how qualified they are. We know really little about what happens in the school. And yeah, and it's a really like we still use a lot of evidence that is not causal to make a policy, this kind of policy recommendations, which is a really pity. Especially if you think about the municipality level. The officials at the municipality level, do they have the resources to find out that, oh, is this a good advice based on evidence or not? I argue that not. So, I have still 5 minutes, but so the challenges for Finland is for the future to get this kind of field experiments going on in education. Well, there are challenges, but I would say that one of the biggest is that the system is so fragmented at the municipality level, and we need coordination. Even Helsinki, which is quite a big town, is quite small if you think about that you want to have a randomization. Because we need the statistical power, and we would really need to have multiple municipalities and schools from different regions. And it's a challenge to explain to the leaders of municipalities and officials that why this is important. So it takes a lot of time for the researchers. And the point which I said that earlier, that we don't have a national learning assessments, but we have a lot of different research groups in different universities saying that their way to measure learning is the best way. Believe me, like every university has their own research group making learning measurements, and they do not coordinate. They even compete each others, and they contact schools, municipalities, and tell that we have a learning measurements and we are going to come there and carry this out again and again. I don't know how it works in Denmark, but in Finland I would argue that this is, I don't know what is the return for this behavior for the schools, because it takes time from the teachers, from the officials to carry out these measurements all again and all again. And it also means that those research groups, they are focusing on measurement, not on causal analysis. So they are just keen about measuring how some outcome develops over time, and not about how to make improvements. The causal analysis, what we are hearing today. So it's a pity. And also, while we have some good registers on schools, best data is still in the municipality registers, and each municipality have different understanding how to use the register data, how to store it, and so on. So it's a big challenge to try to combine all of those from different municipalities, especially if you have a grant, which is 2-year grant, and you need to do the research quite fast. So it's a complicated thing. But I'm not going to be just negative, so I'm going to give some positive signals from Finland. People who know me, they know that I'm quite negative. But there are some positive signals for this. For example, Helsinki has started to has carried out a field experiment, which is still going on, which is really good thing. That is a reading experiment for the first and second graders. Second graders, yeah, I should know it. What I have been involved in that, it has been a lot about this kind of personal connection, how researchers really contact the municipality leaders or the officials in there, and how that connection works. If the connection doesn't work, no chance, you're not going to make any field experiments. And that's a pity, because this is the way how we really create evidence. And it shouldn't be about this kind of personal relationships, but we would need some kind of institutional context where this would work. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hannu. And now we'll have Marjo Kyllönen from City of Helsinki. Please, yes, to defend the municipalities, yes.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Hannu, about your insight, and you kind of warned me that whether I'm going to be offended, but actually you hit the nail. There's the difficulty here in Finland. So I'm Marjo Kyllönen, and I'm coming from the city of Helsinki. I'm just trying to find out how that's...
It's the green button.
Yeah, so... Yeah, good. And I'm a development service director there, and in my unit we have a small research and evaluation team consisting of 4 people, and I think that's kind of a luxury in terms of Finnish environment of Finnish municipalities. That's even our neighborhood cities have congratulated me that we have this kind of research. The article, Stina Nyhus Larsen, where you are somewhere there. So I was so excited when I got the article, and I read it through, and actually there are a lot of similarities that what we are facing in Helsinki, specifically in Helsinki. And what I was really interested in was the kind of the summary, the link to the summary where I could read through all the experiments that you have meta-analyzed, and if I understood it correctly from Hannu's comments, so that could be useful to somehow to include to your final report. Otherwise, I'm not a researcher, so my insight here is that what does it mean for a municipality? Why do we need collaboration with academia, with the researchers and university, and well, so this will be a bit different presentation, so bear with me. City of Helsinki is the biggest education provider in Finland, and as it's said here or written here, so our aim is to build good learning and well-being of all our citizens, and to build sustainable future together to the individuals, but for the society. and the globe itself. And for us, it's utmost important that we work towards equal learning, and we are strengthening the core competencies and skills, and also to develop social and emotional skills. And as you can, and this is quite a big job and challenge for us, because we are serving approximately 200,000 people who are attending our services, and half of them, like approximately 100,000, are attending this kind of compulsory education or upper secondary education. And still, how Hannu, you said it, so still when thinking of randomized experiments, so we are not that big number. But anyway, as a municipality, we think that how to work in the most effective way to gain the objectives that we have. And thinking of teachers and professionals, so we have more than 15,000 people working in our education division, and majority of them are teachers. So there's a big challenge, and we really need to be ambitious in our actions, and also know what is the best way to work with our learners, and specifically with our teachers and principals. We have in City of Helsinki, we have a strategy for education 2030, and actually, as you can see in that strategy, we have set ourselves quite a high objectives that we in Helsinki, that we use data and research to promote learners' growth and development. And we also want to encourage our schools, our teachers, to use diversity of the learning methods, but not only, but so that they are based, or they assess those tools that they are using according the research and they can utilize the research data. And here it's very ambitious, and that is something that is currently driving us, as we heard from Hannu's comments, that the kind of the landscape or the environment in Finland is not that good in terms of doing this, but this is what we are aiming at. And also, when looking at our very new mayor's city strategy that was just released a few weeks ago, so in that strategy we also say that we rely on research data in developing our operation as the whole city, not only the education. And also we also conduct research ourselves, so we see it utmost important that we work in collaboration with universities and with the researchers to improve and develop our work. So why do we really need collaboration between academia or universities and decision makers? We understand that education is an investment for the future, and actually half of our city budget is allocated to education services. And for us, it's really important that our resources are wisely distributed and used. And for example, thinking of polarization, so in Helsinki, we have a funding called need-based funding to all the early childhood education centers and schools located in the lower socio-economical district. And we give them more resources, more money, and our question there is that how do we know that using this resource is reducing disparities amongst in our city? Sorry, I need to go back. Polarization and segregation is a growing phenomenon in Helsinki, and also how I understood the article. So it was something also that has been discussed in Denmark, and I think that all over the world, but in this Nordic framework. And our ethos in education is to promote equality and equity, as already mentioned, but according the latest PISA research 2022, the basic education fails in its task to bridge the gap. So our challenge as an educator is how do we know that our structures, our processes, our pedagogical activities have a positive impact to our children's and young ones' growth and learning? So randomized controlled field experiments are part of our broader evaluation framework. And these experiments gives us, as education providers and policymakers, information and understanding how to improve our education procedures and learning outcomes. For example, to achieve the objective of our city strategy that every local school in Helsinki is a good quality school, we need deeper research and data-based understanding of the effectiveness of our everyday practices in schools and early childhood education. In Finland, teachers have quite a broad pedagogical freedom, and they may decide over the tools and methods they use at the classroom, and we really respect that. But to ensure that every child and young one can achieve good skills and competencies to manage in a continued education and working life, we need absolutely better understanding how to support our schools and teachers to choose the best tools and approaches. And we are specifically interested in knowing and understanding better how to improve the learning and growth of disadvantaged children and young ones. As I pointed out in the very beginning, so this article and this meta-analysis has a lot of similarities we are currently focusing in our research. And actually, I think it was also, Hannu, you mentioned that there has to be repetitions. So these are something that at least I myself are really interested to discuss with our researchers that we already collaborate here in Finland. So some thoughts, really some reflections when I was reading this paper. So first thing that when we are having, as a city administrator, so it's really important that we do discuss with the researchers how to design the intervention that affects, because when they are well designed, so they affect the positively to learning outcomes of children of any age. So, and then quite obviously, we all know that intervention targeted to younger children are more effective and promising, and that's something that I have already carried from that article to our executive leading group in Helsinki, and that's something also that maybe have to be considered even more. That what does that mean, for example, in allocating our money to the different activities? Then I have one question mark that maybe that's an area to further study or to get better understanding. According to the meta-analysis, it said that the interventions that are targeted towards education were more effective than those targeted directly at children or their parents. And the thing that is really something that we have been discussing, and it's kind of challenging, that we know from many researches that the social economical background of the child is the strongest indicator to the learning results. So what do we not know yet? So what could be, what is the missing puzzle in this picture? Because I'm quite positive that we should be looking at that direction and not just accept that, okay, we do all the interventions to the schools and teachers, but also to think of that what could be the most effective interventions or the effective interventions towards the families and parents or together with them that could kind of cut that negative circle of the background of the children. So maybe that's something to discuss together further on. So finally, here you can see the picture of our new city strategy, a Helsinki we can be proud of. And if and when we want to be proud of our city. So we need this collaboration in between researchers and city administration to know better what to do more effectively in terms of achieving our goal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mario. And now we have time. We'll take 2 questions before we take a coffee break. So Matti Sarvimäki here, please. Wait for the mic. So.
Thank you very much. This was really helpful, particularly for those of us who are thinking about RCTs for education. So what you need there always is some sort of a benchmark of, what should we have power to detect? And now you're given one more of us to use, like 0.01 standard deviations. But what I would be very curious is that if you look at the studies that you analyze, what's the fraction of those studies that could detect 0.1 standard deviation effects? Are they kind of generally underpowered? That's my...
So we haven't formally looked into this for all studies, but in all cases when we design interventions, we typically conduct a power analysis at first. So we are almost always at least aiming for having studies that are powered enough to detect effect sizes. So in the cases where they are insignificant, I would assume that it's rarely because they are underpowered. But we haven't formally checked, so I cannot say for sure. Yeah.
Okay, and Kaisa, please.
Yeah, hi, thanks, very interesting. One thing that particularly drew my attention was this comparison between RCTs and quasi-experimental studies. So for me, it's kind of easy to understand when you do this within a particular study, comparing, how the estimated effects differ across using, different strategies. But then when you're doing this across, or between studies, at least for me, it's kind of harder to interpret. So, I mean, perhaps it really requires quite a sort of comprehensive discussion of what kind of statements can you actually make about how good are quasi-experimental studies compared to RCTs. You kind of started to you made some comments on this in your discussion, but somehow, what kind of statements can you actually make based on this comparison? I mean, okay, this is a big question, but that's something that kind of sort of to be careful not to make too strong statements in a way. Okay.
Yeah, so definitely we have to be careful when sort of comparing these 2 methods because, they have these different assumptions. So they do not speak about the same participants in a way, or they do not speak about the same effect in a way. So maybe we should discuss that more explicitly in the paper. That's a good comment.
Okay, thanks. So now we'll have a coffee break and we'll be back at 25 past with active labor market policies.